Avi Mayer is the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, and he joins me now from Jerusalem. Avi, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well.
Look, this controversy with UNRWA, Canada, the US have paused funding to UNRWA, so have 7 other countries. I think as we count now, UK, Australia, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Finland have taken similar action. Is it fair, or is this a slight overreaction right now?
Look, UNRWA has been a problem for many years. Some would say that it dates back to its very foundation in the aftermath of Israel's War of Independence in 1949, when it was granted this mandate that is quite different than that of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Whereas the UNHCR is tasked with the resettlement of refugees and essentially ending the refugee status, UNRWA exists to perpetuate the refugee status of those Palestinians who it serves, which is why you've seen the number of Palestinian refugees or people classified as Palestinian refugees balloon over the past 75 years to millions and millions around the world, including those who required citizenship in their current places of residence. Over the past 20 years or so, various different organizations have raised concerns about all sorts of ties between UNRWA and terrorist groups, as well as UNRWA's own operations, which are viewed as being tainted by incitement to violence, the delegitimization of Israel's right to exist, anti-Semitic tropes, and so on and so forth. For many years, there have been all sorts of charges about UNRWA's ties to Hamas, that it can only operate in Gaza because it's in cahoots with Hamas in many respects, that many of its employees are in fact Hamas members. And in fact, that has come to a head during the current conflict. Just a few weeks ago, when I was still at the Jerusalem Post, we published a report that was first circulated by an Israeli journalist named
Yeah.
Almog Boker, that one of the hostages in
If I
Gaza.
can jump in, because you've packed a lot
Sure.
in there, but that's really that post that you put up is what led me to ask you for the interview,
Mhm.
because you wrote that an Israeli who had been held hostage in Gaza, he was the captive of a teacher employed by UNRWA, and that UNRWA later on turned around and slammed your report at the Jerusalem Post, essentially saying it was ungrounded, unfounded. How dare you? What did they say to you?
They said exactly that, that they had not been presented with evidence. These are unsubstantiated allegations, and they requested very strongly that we
Right.
remove the report from our website. I,
You
of
got it
course, did
wrong.
not comply.
You got it
Um,
wrong because you only said there was one.
right,
But
exactly. At the time, we
in
only knew of
fact,
one. Right.
there's at least a dozen UNRWA employees that have been named, and that has been provided to the White House as well as a number of countries. So you didn't get it wrong, but you spoke about one case, and I know that I shouldn't inject any humor in what is a very serious situation. But the fact is that in fact they got off pretty lightly in your story compared to what's come out now.
Yeah, I mean, look, subsequently, we've learned that more than one teacher actually have held hostages in their homes, including some who are parents of children, who locked these hostages away without adequate food, water, or medical care. But of course, the big story in recent days, as you just said, were these 12 or so UNRWA employees who have been found to be directly involved in the Hamas massacre of October 7th. About half of them are themselves teachers, which is astounding when you think about it. Others have other roles within the organization, but they played an active role in kidnapping, massacring, transferring weapons to Hamas on the day of the massacre. And one report that just came out a short while ago by the Wall Street Journal said that according to an intelligence estimate, about 1 in 10 UNRWA employees in Gaza are somehow linked to terrorist organizations. That's about 1,200 people. So in the aftermath of the first revelation about the 12, we were hearing many critics saying, how could you judge an entire organization based on the actions of only 12 people? Here we see we're talking about 1,200 people, which is about 1 out of every 10 employees. That is an organization that is entirely compromised and requires substantive reform.
So I want to explore that a little bit with you. I mean, the U.S. National Security spokesman John Kirby said today it's serious, but you shouldn't impugn the characters of 10,000 employees across the region that UNRWA is operating in.
Look, that is certainly Admiral Kirby's prerogative. I think the situation is much deeper than that, and we've known it for many, many years. This is an organization that is tainted from the very core of its mandate. Its previous director has said explicitly that it has a political mandate and that we can't do anything about it. We just operate within the confines of that mandate. But if the mandate itself is wrong, if it is just perpetuating the problem, which is what it's doing, then perhaps the mandate needs to change or the organization needs to be dismantled and the refugees handed over to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and their status made equal to the refugees of any country around the world. I think that is probably what we need to explore, perhaps not at this moment when UNRWA is doing important work in some respects in Gaza, caring for the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian population there. But at some point in the future, a reckoning must come, and the organization needs to either reform or be totally dismantled and be absorbed into
What's
another
the
body.
alternative? I mean, I've been to Gaza hundreds of times as a correspondent over the years. I'm sure you've probably been there. The UNRWA hands out, I've seen them handing out, water and powdered milk and rice. And I mean, they're a frontline aid agency. They are in an environment which is run by Hamas. Obviously, some people are going to get into the organization no matter how good your screening is. But I don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt either. And I want to ask you, do you think that they completely not only failed in that respect, but turned a blind eye to what was happening in their organization, how deep Hamas was infiltrating the organization, using the organization maybe as a front and to protect the Hamas military wing?
Look, according to former UNRWA officials, there are no pre-employment screening procedures in place. They essentially will hire pretty much anyone. And so, yes, we know as a matter of fact, up until this point, and this was admitted by former directors of the organization, that there were Hamas members. Now we know that it's at least 1 in every 10 members of their team who are somehow affiliated with either Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or other terrorist organizations. That is profound. That is an organization that has a very deep-set problem. And so you asked what the alternative is. I think the alternative is very clear. Move the Palestinian refugee problem to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which deals with every other refugee case around the world. The Palestinians are the only group that has their own...
What would that do?
I'm sorry, what's that?
What would that do if you move
the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is an organization that has a budget in the billions, that deals with millions upon millions of refugees around the world, and it simply is not tainted in the same way that UNRWA is. It is an organization that is unfortunately tainted to the core. It has been compromised for many, many years, and it simply needs to either reform and do so seriously with an independent investigation looking into what all those problems are and how they can be addressed, or dismantled and absorbed into UN High Commissioner of Refugees. I don't see an alternative.
Where do you think we're headed right now? I mean, in Jerusalem, there was a conference last night that had a lot of right-wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet in there, including Ben Gvir, who's, former Kach member. And, they were dancing around the idea that they relocate Palestinians out of Gaza. I mean, is that not beyond extreme? Do Israelis support that, do you think? Or do you think that that is gaining momentum within Israel?
I think the overwhelming majority of Israelis are horrified by the notion of any return to Gaza on a permanent basis. The notion of resettling Jews in Gaza, I think, is one that is entirely foreign to the vast majority of Israelis. What you saw at that really unfortunate conference in Jerusalem last night, which, as you said, was indeed attended by members of this government, was a display of extremism that is highly unrepresentative of Israeli society. What Israelis want is to live in peace and security. That can only be achieved when the hostages are brought home and Hamas's capacity to ever carry out a massacre like October the 7th is dismantled. That is the goal here. The goal is not to repopulate Gaza, and I hope that we're able to achieve those goals very soon.
How does it end? Is it military reoccupation of Gaza? I mean, if you don't bring settlers back, is it continued military occupation of Gaza, which may go on for years? And do you, like behind the scenes, what are you hearing? Do you think that there is momentum for an international effort now to bring about some kind of Palestinian self-rule in Gaza that will replace the extremist group Hamas and get them out of them?
Look, there are various proposals being floated at this time. From what I'm hearing, it is likely there will be some kind of Israeli presence in Gaza at least till the end of the current year, until the end of 2024. It will not look the way it does now. There'll probably be far fewer troops actually on the ground, but Israel will maintain the capacity to come in and deal with terrorist activity as it resurfaces, as it almost certainly will. As for longer-term arrangements, we've heard various conversations about a multinational force, perhaps populated by Arab states in the Gulf, coming in and taking responsibility for security of that territory. But yes, certainly we would want to see some kind of Palestinian self-rule reemerge in that territory, one that is not tainted by terrorism like Hamas or by association with terrorism as the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank currently is. What that looks like remains to be seen. There are various different proposals floating about. We certainly hope that that's something that can be effectuated as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, what a big remain to be seen chapter that still has to be written, right? So anyway, Avi Mayer, the former editor-in-chief of Jerusalem Post, great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.